Good afternoon, everybody. Brian Sullivan, President of Nassau C.O.B.A. I have a prepared statement. I've been writing notes, so hopefully I can read through it and scribbling notes all afternoon. Because the clock's not running up, probably take about 4 minutes. As I was preparing for today, I usually come up here and I speak every year at this budget meeting. I was rereading my notes from last year, and I realized that I can almost give the same speech this year as I gave last year. We were able to make some progress on several specific issues, like the purchase of vehicles, agreeing to provide protective vests for our members. Those orders are out. Exactly where they are, I don't know. We do have the staff-resistant vest coming for the officers, ballistic vest coming. That's still pending. Bonding, like we talked about before, for the HVAC projects and many other problems I spoke about from last year, they remain today. The do more with less mindset has definitely turned into the do more with nothing mindset, creating an ever-increasing position of working from a disadvantage. The inmates, our officers, and most importantly, public safety at large is at a disadvantage with what's been going on our end of the criminal justice system. The new baseline that we're working from after years of draconian budget cuts and the not so coincidental precipitous drop in the inmate head count by hundreds of inmates, which I've spoken about here several times before, has made the correctional facility almost unrecognizable to somebody like me who's been here over 29 years. The place is, it's a shell of its former self. It is in dire need of attention, both security-wise and structurally. All of the draconian cutting that's gone on over the last few years has resulted in washing away of so much of what is needed to run a facility like this properly. I know we have a new county executive administration coming in short order. When that does occur, I will be on the front lines to ensure that we start investing in this facility. That's long overdue. It's a dangerous place full of dangerous people. And in particular, attention must be paid to security, the infrastructure, for both the safety of our officers as well as the inmate population and the public. For example, last year I stood here and I talked about security, security, security. This year I have to talk about staffing, staffing, staffing. The number one problem we now face at the correctional facility is staffing. We just endured a summer like we haven't seen in many years. Our staff head count is at the lowest it's been in decades. The department has not kept pace with mass retirements in the last few years and only recently hired the recruit class that we talked about of 28 for the first time in almost 2 years. They actually hired people. This precipitous drop in staff has resulted in our officers being forced to work extreme amounts of forced overtime where they're not allowed to leave or go home because the posts have to be covered for public safety. And has also many times then resulted in the closure of security posts that protect not only the jail but the community itself because we didn't have enough staff to cover a lot of these posts. Of course, this drop in staff has also resulted in a lack of proper available response for emergencies. Now, I have some numbers that I think you're going to be extremely interested in as far as our staff. Right now, we have 24 people that have 30 years or more of service as of right now. At the end of this year, 2017, we'll have 37 people with over 30 years of service. July 2018, the middle of next year, there'll be 52 people with 30 years of service. The end of December, December of 18, there'll be 64 people with 30 plus years on the job. By August 2018, there'll be 182 people with 25 years plus on the job. 182 people with 25 plus years on the job. As you all know, I hope we can retire with 25 years on, no age. The people that stay longer have to go 30 and 55. I've talked repeatedly with the county and the sheriff about a recruitment drive to try and get people in here. We don't do recruitment like the police does. People, there just is not enough attention paid to this job. And looking at a potential of a budgeted amount of, what was it that the sheriff said, 67 or something additional people, by this time next year we could have 182 people leave this department. I don't know where we're going to be if those people all decide to leave. Let me get back to my original. We continue to lack a fully staffed and trained and equipped emergency response team. I do have an agreement with the county to implement a full-time team that's completely contingent upon the hiring of new staff, and with the current staffing levels, it hasn't been possible to do yet. We just don't have the bodies to put into a full-time team, which I won't get into the particulars, but there'll be one team for each of the rotating 3 platoons. They'll be there from whenever the inmates are out. I'll put it that way. The inmates get out in the morning until they're locked away at night. We'll have these several-man teams. Our current standby team continues to be at the lowest levels and needs immediate attention and replenishment. I spoke here last year that we were in the low 20s on our call-up emergency response team, that guys that they come in from home, guys that are on duty and they bring in. No one's been put in since I stood here last year. I don't think we've put anybody into the emergency response team in almost 10 years. That's completely unacceptable. The lack of training obviously continues. Slowly and methodically, training has been cut and eroded down to the basic minimums that the state currently requires, which is approximately 14 hours a year. Commissioner Ryder, when he was here before, he extolled the virtues of training, treating people like family, giving them the tools that they need to do the job correctly. It's night and day between the police department and the sheriff's department. In the world we live in now, unfortunately, we all talked about what happened in Las Vegas earlier today. It's a disgrace. We all know about the myriad of law enforcement training, what happened out there, the first responders. I'm not comparing us to the police, it's a different thing, but we are law enforcement, and training and equipment goes hand in hand with the job you're supposed to perform. Law enforcement training, many departments utilize to protect the public and run at peak efficiency, training that teaches proper reactions to various scenarios. Training and equipment that many times can be paid for through government grant programs. I've spoken about that last year, I'm speaking about it again today, and I seem to be knocking on doors that just aren't answering, none of which this department appears to be actively pursuing grant programs to pay for training and equipment. As you all know, lack of proper training ultimately results in liability. Next, the department's continued consolidation plan, which we just talked about before, wherein inmates are all squeezed into as few housing areas as possible, continues to create artificial overcrowding in our facility while floors and dormitories remain closed. This results in the commingling of rival gangs, etc., without the ability to separate them and have relief valves. The sheriff said that things happen in jail. Yeah, things happen in jail, but when you have relief valves and you're able to remove certain people from certain situations, it certainly helps a lot, instead of putting a lot of people into smaller areas. That's going back several years, even with other union administrations. This would also be the results of the commingled crowd without the ability to separate them. Unfortunately, right now, this would also be almost impossible to rectify with the staffing levels we currently have. We can't even open new areas because we don't have the bodies to staff them. The sheriff and I continue to clash on issues related to the lack of regular and proper facility-wide searches. I'm happy that we did finally receive contraband detecting equipment, the boss chairs that the sheriff talked about, they're in. Their body cavity search tools, metal detectors, hand wands. We still need equipment and a proper search policy for everyone who enters our facility, including our members. Everybody that comes in and out of this place should be going through a search process. Thankfully, moving on, we've also moved on from the Armour Correctional and brought inmate healthcare back to NUMC. With regard to this, particular attention needs to be paid to beefing up security in NUMC. The sheriff and the deputy county executive spoke before that most of the things are still going to be done at the jail. I believe they are modeling themselves after what Armour had set up. A lot of things are going to be done at the jail, but we are anticipating a greater number of inmates being brought to NUMC. And one of the biggest issues that I have is beefing up security at NUMC. If we're going to have more people in there, we're going to be utilizing certain floors for law enforcement areas. I've spoken to people at the hospital. I plan on continuing to speak to people in the hospital because we've had prison wards that were closed, we had old prison wards that were closed, and if we're going to go back to NUMC, there's no reason why we can't reinstitute at least a pseudo prison ward to where it's a locked ward. We don't have to worry about the public walking in. We have security measures in place, windows and doors and all that. These are all things that will have to be paid for, but it's all part of bonding and everything we talked about. Stronger measures when it comes to the utilization of certain areas like the hospital, as I said. Lastly, you have the packages that I sent out to everybody about the infrastructure of the place. I put together for you showing how the place is crumbling, from the roofs to electrical and plumbing issues to security, monitoring the equipment, fences, roof alarms, you name it. we're in the Stone Age. This place is seriously lacking and in need of structural upgrades to move forward. Radio repeaters, we talked about the body alarms. The body alarms, it seems like we moved on from that. I'm not moving on from that. We used to have body alarms. It was a separate and distinct system that an officer is able to carry with them. We have problems with the radio systems. The sheriff talked about there's a button on the radio. What happens when the whole radio system goes down, like it does all the time? When that goes down, that little red button goes down too, and you have no help. We've talked about, several years ago we had $400,000 allotted. I walked around with the old captain years ago, and apparently when I wasn't here with the union last time, I guess with all the other issues and freezes and everything else, that all went by the wayside. It's something I seriously want to get back into. Again, the officers need these tools along with stab-resistant vests, bulletproof vests, equipment to metal detection equipment, search policies, everything else. A lot of these things are no-brainers. They should be. They're in every other correctional facility there is, and we just don't have them here. We all know the pendulum is swung far enough in the wrong direction. Many tens of millions of dollars in cuts at the jail have been done. Enough is enough. We need to start rebuilding what is a major metropolitan correctional facility in a thoughtful and deliberate manner to make it more efficient, make it compliant, and most of all, make it a facility that's safe and secure and in good order for the taxpayers of Nassau County. And again, to paraphrase Commissioner Ryder that was here before, morale here is at an all-time low. I'm glad to hear that morale is flying in the police department. Morale here couldn't be any lower. Hopefully it couldn't be any lower. Like I said, we're in the Stone Age compared to the police department. I don't compare myself to any other unit in this county, aside because we're a law enforcement unit. I don't know why we're able to fix a lot of these things in the police department. Things just don't seem to happen here. We're in the Stone Age. The thing that I keyed on today, it actually tells me exactly where we are, and my members will agree with me 100%. When you treat your people like family and you give them the tools they need, the job runs efficiently. We couldn't be more opposite from the police department where we are right now. Thank you for the time. Anybody has any questions?
Okay, thank you, Brian. Brian, I have one question. A few months back, we went on a tour of the facility. I believe it took us 2.5 hours. Has any of the situations that we witnessed at the jail at that particular time have been corrected?
The only thing that's been corrected is we have you folks bonded on the HVAC systems, like Legislator Bino spoke about. There's issues that go along with that before that has to be implemented. I was glad to see it. The summer was brutal. Those machines on the roofs of the 832 building are the original ones from 1992. Just imagine working in a dorm with 52 inmates and it's 100 degrees in the middle of July and August. That's not a fun place to be. I'm glad to see that that's done. The roofs haven't been replaced. There's leaks. There's problems with electrical, plumbing everywhere. There was some of the monitors were replaced, but the majority of the security monitors need to still be replaced. Roof, motion detection equipment, video monitors, things like that, and we're still cutting.
All right, thank you, Brian. Legislator Walker. Okay.
Yes.
I know your head count certainly is at an all-time low. And is there any way, I was in the mall a couple of weeks ago and they had tables set up and they were basically doing recruiting for our police department. Who makes that decision? I mean, couldn't that same thing be done?
Our department should be making that decision to get out and
right,
recruit.
To get out and recruit.
We've had recruit drives in the past. They'll go to malls, they'll go to fairs, they'll go to job fairs, they'll go to the Belmore Street Fair, things like that, set up a table. We used to have people in our academy would go around. There was a mock cell in some of our vehicles and things like that they bring around. I couldn't tell you the last time we did that. There's no recruitment here whatsoever.
Well, it seems like we sure need to get moving on that because it needs to be a class after a class after a class after a class.
Without a doubt. If you look back at the numbers I just gave you before, several months down the road, I mean, you think it was bad this summer. It was really bad. There were people that were working double shifts every single day and they couldn't go home. That's the way it was when I started way back 100 years ago when crack and AIDS and everything hit big and the jail was doubling and tripling in size because of the late 80s, early 90s. But we're not in that situation now. There just has to be more attention paid to to rolling things over and get them in here. And I'm glad to see that they're having 167 people in the police department, classes of 80 and all of that. We just don't have it here. The attention's got to be paid, and it hasn't been. It's been ignored.
Well, we'll just have to
Let me ask you a
work on it.
question. What can you attribute that to? If we need additional officers at the jail, what do you contribute it to? That we're not getting?
The number one thing is the way the place is managed, the way there is no recruitment drive, the way that the word is just not out. They'll give it 10. When I took this test 30 years ago, 15,000, 18,000 people took the test. They give these tests now, they're lucky to get a couple of thousand, maybe 1,000. I don't get it. In this day and age, with the way the economy's been and everything else, you can't tell me that people wouldn't be clamoring for a civil service job with benefits and pensions and all of that, and retirement. So, I don't think people would rather work in a restaurant for the next 50 years than work in the department of the sheriff's department.
I was just going to say on that topic, would it help you if, and I imagine the answer is yes, if we all were in agreement to writing a letter, and everyone signing it, demanding that they move forward on this issue?
I would be in complete agreement with that.
Okay.
Like the sheriff said before, they did send out 100, 105 or something like that. They brought people in off one of the older lists that's there. There are 2 lists that are available right now. I think they may have finished up to 2013 or at the very bottom of it, but there's 2 full lists that are there to be gone through, and I'm sure there's hundreds, if not a few thousand people on these lists. Let's go. Let's go. I know it just hasn't been done. We got to get the ball rolling here. There has to be a systematic plan put in place to foresee the attrition and the way people leave. And we can't have what we just had this past summer, with guys just not being able to leave. And I mean, there were people that were stuck past 16 hours a day, 18 hours a day. It's not safe for them. It's not safe for the officers. Not safe driving home after working in this lunatic asylum for 18 hours, driving home to your family, and then having to be back for the next tour the next morning. It can't go on like that. It's completely unsafe. It's unreasonable.
Legislator Ford.
Thank you very much. What size class can be accommodated, for the correction officers? I mean, he seemed to say 25, but
I've gotten differing answers. When I first came through the academy here, I started with a class of 100.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that the state has limited some of these classes. They could double up classes. They could put a class of 25 on the days, a class of 25 on 4 to 12. I think they could probably get a pass from the state to put a class of 50 in, or 100 or 75. I haven't gotten a straight answer out of anybody in particular of where this number of 25 came from. I think that was just a guideline that they were using. If we hire 25 people every year, we'll be okay. But that backfired in their faces, because we have, last year we had, the last several years, we've had retirement parties where I have 60, 70, 80 guys that are being honored at retirement parties. Hiring 25 to replace them is absurd.
it is absurd. Yeah.
When I left the union back in 2011, we had a little less than 1,100 officers, 1,050 working here. Right now we have under 800. It's dropped. And a lot of that is from when the jail was big, was doubling in size in the late 80s, early 90s. All of those guys that are in my generation and behind me, and a few in front of me, they're all hitting their 25s and 30s, and they're running out the door. There's not a lot of incentive to stay in a job like this.
So it won't take long for them to just start recruitment, but I don't know how far they got into the list from 2015. Just how many people
I know there's
are still on it?
people, friends and family, they ask me all the time, when are they going to start doing it? My kid's on the list, my neighbor's on the list, and, chasing civil service around the whole 9 yards, trying to get it done.
Well, I think that we need, first of all, to get them to start working on that list tomorrow, to start looking at the candidates, reaching out to them. There's no reason why we can't start
Right.
tomorrow, and I think that what we need to do is schedule the next test, go after civil service to get this done, and then authorize people to go out and do a recruitment drive. Because I know a lot of people ask,
Sure.
people are always, I agree with you, I mean, I know people who would be interested
Sure.
in taking that test and getting this job,
And
so it's...
I don't agree with the sheriff on a lot of things. One of the things that I agree with him on is that if they sent out a packet, 105 packets, 100 packets, you're not getting 100 candidates. A lot of people fail physicals, psychs, medicals, things like that. You're lucky to get 25. out of that 100 that goes out. So they should put out another 100
Right.
and get them backed up and have, put more in the chute and get it going. If we can get another class of, I'd be thrilled if we could get a class of 40 in by the end of the year. Do I see it happening? I don't think so. Especially with administrations turning over and everything else, I don't see it.
I'd like to see a pool of like 500 candidates to choosing from, but just my last thing, I'm amazed that we're still having problems with the roof, because I remember when I first was elected, that was an issue way back when.
Right.
So I just am stymied over the fact that we can't get this thing corrected.
Roofs had been replaced back then, but the
Yeah.
roofs are in dire need because of problems and the roof problem, and the air conditioning
Yeah.
problems and everything else. They all gotta be replaced again.
All right, and let's keep me informed about the body alarms.
I'll be personally in touch.
Every year, I don't want to have to ask about it next year.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want you to do the math. What's the ratio of correction officers to the number of inmates?
You have to put it in perspective. There's about 800 officers,
Right.
there's 1,200,
Right.
there's not 800 officers working at any particular time, because there's a total of 800 officers working there. There's about 90 posts, 90 people in a security platoon, then you have ancillary units. There's 40-something people in transportation, there's people who work the visiting area, people work in the rehab area, medical, but it's a little hard to quantify exactly the number of people, but we need more people, because we're down in all of these areas, and they're in security. They were using, in the middle of the summer, the end of the summer, they were ordering 30, 40 people a night. The weekends were horrendous, telling guys that you're stuck, you're there at 7:30 in the morning, you're not going home until after midnight, and sometimes they didn't go home after midnight because they had to wait a little while longer to get people in. Our guys at the control desk were doing an incredible job trying to get these bodies in.
I know, I got you. Legislator Salah just has a
No,
couple of questions.
No, this is very concerning. Everything you're saying is very concerning, and some of the things that you're saying are very inconsistent, or I guess not congruent with what the sheriff said. Is there, besides the roof, which he said that it was repaired, what else is not consistent with the case that you believe it to be?
As far as what?
I mean, as far as certain things you mentioned, as far as
Well,
what?
like I said, with the infrastructure, there hasn't been a hell of a lot of attention paid for the infrastructure. It's my understanding there was a bond proposal floated for anywhere between $12 and $15 million going forward, maybe for next year.
It never came to us.
There's no capital project money now to do it, but it may not have gotten here. But I mean, we have, like I said, you've all seen that packet that I handed around. The place is crumbling. You see, when it rains, the roofs, the ceilings leak like you're standing outside in certain areas of this place.
I understand that it's not easily quantifiable in terms of the ratio that the presiding officer was asking about, but per cell block, how many officers do you have overseeing how many inmates?
In a normal cell block in the 832 building where you have 104 inmates, there's 4 officers.
4 to 104
4 to
people.
104 in a housing area. That's normal staffing. But the idea is, and I'm not saying that should be increased when you have, of course I love having it increased, but when you have mental health inmates, they'll put an extra officer there. But the problem is, you'll have those 4 officers for those 104 inmates, but there's nobody else to respond when there's an emergency. We have 18 people on the emergency response team right now. There should be 80 on the emergency response team. I'm waiting to get the staffing up so we can get a full-time emergency response team and have X amount of officers, 6, 8, 10, whatever we can negotiate, per platoon that can respond immediately to. They're not going to be standing around doing whatever. It wasn't exactly portrayed the way we need to have this done by the sheriff before, but they'll be doing cell searches. They could help oversee the transport of inmates in the morning, watch the inmate pens that sometimes have 60, 80 inmates going to court in them. They could go, respond immediately to emergencies. You don't have that.
My last question, I know it's late, and I thank my colleagues. Last question. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The problems are many based on what you said, and even with the new administration, the wish list would be quite long.
Not going to be an easy task.
What incentive do you think, not what incentive, but an elected sheriff, would that be better suited to solve these issues, or just an appointed sheriff? Last question.
That's a political question that's a little outside the realm of what we're talking about here today, but I think an elected sheriff would be more would be easier reporting to the taxpayers of Nassau County than an appointed sheriff that has to listen, that has to work at the pleasure of someone else. I think we're the only one or two counties in the state that has an appointed sheriff. I'm all for it, but then it creates another set of problems. So, nothing comes easy.
There's nothing ideal, okay?
There's nothing ideal.
Nothing, okay? The legislative bylaw, and after you, I think I'm gonna call John Bodnick, and then we're gonna go home.
Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Cheers.
Good evening.
Good evening, how are you?
Well, thank you. So, really, I have a comment, and I'm actually imploring this body to consider, and I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but maybe even saying that this is like almost a state of an emergency, to the extent that pulling through these training classes in the manner to which the sheriff has, I guess, explained, we'll never get to the number of officers that we need in order to make sure that our officers and our inmates are safe. And then when I hear that, according to the president here, that we have significant number of officers that are, eligible for retirement next year and the year after, I think that we should employ a process where we're almost pulling two classes at one time and maybe potentially consider having an evening class as well as a daytime class go through this academy. Because I think if we do it at the rate and with the method that the sheriff has laid out, we'll never get to the numbers that we need. So I'm in support of a letter that Legislator Schaefer has suggested, and I think that we need to consider requesting that process be employed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good night.